Hello everyone and welcome back to a new video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the brand new Zenvo Aurora, both the Agil and Tour specifications, and I'm going to be showing you guys these designs and what I think about them, and I'm going to be showing you guys all the little details and explaining things for you guys about this brand new hypercar. First of all, I'm going to give my initial thoughts, and then we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into these two designs, and then I'm going to finish with my final thoughts. Let's start off with the Agil specification over here. Agil for agile. This is the more performance and I guess track focused, you could say, version of the Zenvo Aurora. And I think this version is definitely, it looks very purpose built. So you have a lot of functional features that you can see, and a lot of it is focused on performance and aero and that kind of stuff that you usually see on track cars. And then if you go over to the Tour, you have a more traditional design as we look around that kind of feels a little bit more restrained than the Agil version, which is a little bit more extreme. So that's kind of the main difference, and I'm going to be showing you guys the details of both of these. Both of them really, but even more the Agil specification. It has a very lightweight look, and I feel like part of that is because it has a lot of these large gaping vents over here, and you also have a lot of exposed carbon fiber, which removes visual mass. We'll talk about that later. And even the Tour specification, there's a lot of exposed carbon and a lot of open spaces, so you can kind of see that the car feels very lightweight and it feels very nimble and agile. Again, really the main differences between these two is that the Agil is more extreme, more performance focused, and the Tour is a little bit more classy, a little bit more elegant. Well, now that we've talked about that, let's jump right into the breakdown. So we're going to go over the front view of the Agil and Tour specifications respectively. Then we're going to go on to their side views, and then we're going to talk about the rear, and then I'll give my final thoughts after that. So to start off with the Agil specification over here, you could see a very aggressive sort of theme here. The styling is very angry. You have the headlights over here that are pointed upwards to give it more of this mean, angry look. And speaking of these headlights, they're fairly simple. You have some daytime running lights up here, and then the main headlight down here. Pretty easy and pretty simple design here. And these headlights sit right above some very large empty spaces right here, and you can actually see all of the wheel components inside of this space. So the wheel would be over here, and you can see all of the mechanical pieces, which I think is a really interesting thing. It reminds me a lot of the McLaren Solus GT, where you have this sort of headlight setup, and then you also have a lot of the open space with the wheels and all that, and you could see all of the mechanical bits under inside. And the purpose of having a big open space like this is to improve aero, so air will go in here and it just kind of improves the airflow, air going around and through the car. Some other features of the front end include this traditional Zenvo grille. Their other cars have something pretty similar to this, and you also have this exposed carbon fiber hood over here, a pretty small one, but again, these cars are not really built for practicality. Now moving over to the Tour specification. So over here, this one is pretty similar, except we do have some differences in the lower part of the front end. So we have, for example, we have the same headlights, so they are pretty similar, and you also have the same carbon fiber hood. But if you move lower down, instead of the giant open space that we have in the Agil version, here you have this carbon fiber fin that goes across, and you have it a little bit more of a restrained look. You have some curvature here too, which gives it a more traditional, I guess, grille shape or front fascia. Even this more touring-based version of the Aurora has a very aggressive look, again, thanks to these headlights and also the stance. If you look at these front fenders here, they're very, very pronounced, and they also come all the way down here to form some air outlets that air can escape from. You do have a very aggressive look in this car, whichever way you go. I think the Agil is a little bit more extreme, with the mechanical parts of the wheel being completely visible and open. Pretty interesting design. I think a lot of modern cars, it's kind of hard to do new stuff now because so many things have already been done, especially in the hypercar world where you have so many crazy extreme designs. And I feel like Zenvo really did a good job with the front face of this car. It's very recognizable, and it's something that we haven't really seen before. Another thing that I like is the differences between the two specifications, how you have a different face, whichever one you choose, which I think is really interesting, and not a lot of brands have done that before. Next, I want to move over to the profile view. So, again, to start with the Agil, you have some pretty nice looking lines, and actually there is some elegance to these lines even in this more extreme version. And I think that the proportions of this car are very interesting. It is a mid-engine car with a quad-turbo V12 and a hybrid setup totaling at around like 1,850 horsepower, which is absolutely crazy. But yeah, you have the big V12 sitting in there, so that's why you have these nice proportions. One feature that I really like is the roofline. I definitely think that this is done very well to make the car a little bit sleek. I think, again, you could definitely tell that this is mid-engine right from the get-go just because of the proportions and how the cabin is a little bit more forward than you would have it on a front-engine car. On the Tour, you have pretty much the same sort of setup here. You have this sort of rear muscle that goes over and pretty much the same roof line. Going back to the Agil version, you do have some separation of these lines from some fins and air outlets and other features. Like you have this little like feature here that also releases air, and then another fin down here. Not really a huge fan of this setup. I feel like it's a little bit overcomplicated, but for such an extreme design, I do think it kind of carries out the theme that they were trying to go with here. So I do kind of understand, but at the same time, it's not really something that I like. But in the Tour specification, you do have this area cleaned up a little bit, again, making it look a little bit more traditional and a little bit more classy, although this is still a very high-performance car. What you'll notice is that both of these cars have this very large area in kind of the lower part of the door and the lower part of the side view that is completely exposed carbon fiber. If I kind of just hide my edits really quick, you'll notice that the body color actually disappears through a lot of this side view because of the other carbon fiber features. And what that helps to do is reduce visual mass. I said I would talk about this later in the video, so now I'm going to explain to you guys kind of what I meant by that. So in a car design, when you have a lot of area that's in a darker color contrasting to the body color or the paint of the car, when you have that contrast against especially like darker surfaces, visually it makes the car look smaller and lighter. So by having all this exposed carbon fiber here, when you look at the car from a side view, it looks a lot like smaller, and again, it looks like there's less weight to the car, or like visual weight, like when you look at it, rather than if all of that surface area there was body color. That's kind of the main thing I wanted to talk about, but some of the other details is that you have these nice side skirts. The other thing I want to talk about are these wheels. So on the Agil version, you have these black wheels that have a fairly simple design, but I think it's really fitting for a car like this. You have these thinner spokes, and you can see kind of the brakes underneath. And on the Tour specification, again, you have something a little bit more classy, a little bit more elegant with these sort of like Y shapes here that kind of like form the spokes of the wheel. And these are also done in a silver finish, again, to kind of separate it from the more performance-focused version. So now, finally, I want to move to the rear view of both of these, because here you can actually see a lot of differences, and I think the rear end of this car, specifically the Tour, looks very, very nice, and I'm going to talk about why I think that. So to start off, again, with the Agil version, you have this large rear wing here, because this is a more performance and track-focused version, so you have this large rear wing for downforce. I've talked about downforce before on the channel, but it helps to kind of stick the car to the ground, and it helps it with turning corners and stuff like that. And in addition to the wing, you also have this massive diffuser here. It goes like pretty much like halfway up the rear end. Looks super cool. I always love when manufacturers make these like crazy designs with the diffusers, and I think it looks really cool. It's very pronounced. That's one of like the first things that you would notice in the rear. So these two features are both for aerodynamics and also generating downforce. These taillights, again, kind of mirroring the same theme as the headlights. They're very simple in their design. You just have kind of these two pieces here, and that's kind of all you get. And these taillights actually flank this crazy exhaust setup that you have here, kind of reminiscent of the McLaren 765 LT. I definitely do like that you have the exhaust pipes exposed here, and then they're in this crazy housing. I mean, it's just wild what some automakers are doing now in modern cars, how they're like doing these crazy things with even the exhaust setups and going that far. And again, another thing that you have in the rear is that below the taillights, you can still see the mechanical pieces of the rear wheel, because mirroring the front end, you also have this open area. So again, really just these crazy things that manufacturers are doing now with these performance cars. And I think it's a really interesting segment of the car industry, because it's a segment where a lot of designers get to just kind of go crazy sometimes, whether that's for better or worse. And I think in this case it was probably for better, because I think this design is, again, like I said before, something that we haven't really seen before, and it's really interesting what the designers were able to come up with on this car. You could see, again, a little bit more of an elegant and classy and more simplistic look really is what this one brings, because this is more for touring. It's a little bit more on the fancy side rather than the more aggressive performance side. You have pretty much the same taillights housed in here, but the exhaust setup is much more subtle than you have on the previous version. You also have these nice air outlets over here, and those look really nice. Those are probably to release some hot air from the engine bay. And you'll notice on the Tour specification, you have all of the features in the rear end are nicely housed in this sort of like black surface here, and like all of the components of the rear belong in that space. And I think that it's not something new. A lot of brands have done this before with other cars, but I think it's a really interesting way to do it, is that you give all the features of the rear end, you give them this sort of surface here, and then you put everything inside, and you can package it really nice, and it looks really good, and it makes the design look a little bit nicer when you have this sort of like clean packaging with everything in one space. And I think Zenvo did a really good job with this design. Another thing you have is a diffuser that kind of goes across all the way, again in this same sort of housing area. It's a little bit less pronounced than on the Agil version, but it still looks pretty wild. And then you can still also see some of the mechanical pieces as you can in the front end on the other versions and whatnot. So again, that's pretty much it, but you do have some crazy looking rear ends for these cars. And the other thing is that you get a lot of differences with these two specifications. So one of the things that I really wanted to mention in this video is how certain aspects and features of a design will completely change the feeling that you get by looking at the car. Because when you look at the Agil version, you notice a more angry, aggressive, track-ready car. And then when you look at the Tour specification, you still get some of that aggression, but you get it in a more subtle way, in a more elegant way, and it appears a little bit nicer than it did on the previous version, which is more about brute force. And then you have this kind of almost polar opposite, where you have something that's much like on the nicer side, and both of them actually complement each other really well because of that. Hopefully you guys were able to understand that a little bit and see the differences that some features can make in a design, and how you can change the feeling of a design with just some tweaks and differences. To conclude, I think the Zenvo Aurora is an outstanding design that presents good qualities for a modern-day hypercar, and I think it stands up really well to what some other brands are cooking, and I really think that Zenvo as a brand has a great future ahead of itself, because cars like the Aurora, if Zenvo is willing to keep pushing forward with designs like this and cars that are engineered like this, and just keep on doing stuff that we haven't seen before, I think Zenvo as a brand is going to do really good. Thank you guys so much for watching my design review. I have some more videos coming soon, and if you want to support my channel, that would be great. You could like the video, subscribe it, share with other people who you think might like my content, and yeah, that's going to be the end of this design review though. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in my next videos.